Digression to Hell. An LSD trip report by Tommy. Posted to earwig.org, May 8th, 2018. Earwig note. Claims of measured microgram dosages for LSD are usually unsupported. Quantitative measurements for LSD are very difficult to do, and cannot be done casually. Without further detailed information about how the measurements were derived, it is reasonable to assume that most statements of microgram dosages of LSD on blotter or in microdots are either misinformed or overstated. After a long day at work, I drove over to a friend's apartment, where two of my friends lived. My best friend was the only other person at the apartment with us. I brought with me 1,500 micrograms of LSD and gave my friends 100 micrograms each, leaving me with 1,200. I also had about half an ounce of cannabis that we smoked a decent amount of during the come-up. I noticed I had traces only 10 to 15 minutes after dosing, which was very, very unusual. It typically was 45 minutes to an hour before I had anything that noticeable. I really don't remember much after noticing that until some time later. I don't know why I had this gap of memory during the come-up, to be honest with you. Within what I am told was no more than an hour, I no longer could remember what was happening or what drug I had taken. My best friend ceased to exist, and soon, so did I. I devolved into a black screen with green lines of text, relaying the conversation I was having, making my thoughts, my voice, and my friend's voice indistinguishable. We were two bodies controlled by one consciousness. In such a state of confusion, I no longer was enjoying myself. I began grasping my chest and gasping for air and feeling intense pain throughout my body, particularly my arms. Briefly flashing back into this reality, I began asking what I had taken and how much, and was certain, despite knowing that you cannot die from LSD, that I had taken too much and was going to die. I imagine a lot of this came from not dealing with the emotions of overdosing on fentanyl shortly before this trip, maybe a week to a month prior. That's a blurry time from my life to try and remember though. Well, regardless of any of this, I begged in this moment to be taken to hospital. It was at this point my friend and I had been getting too loud in our two other friends' apartment, so we were sitting in my car in the parking lot. My friend started looking for my car keys to take me to the hospital, and ended up leaving me in the car to go in the apartment to retrieve them. He came back out to the car, asking me where my keys were. He says he was gone for less than a minute, but to me, I was alone in the car for an endless amount of time. It's hard to put a time frame on how long it seemed like, as time basically lost meaning by this point. This all occurred while our other friend followed behind and began yelling to us, "Get him out of there now! He's so obviously on drugs, I don't want to get arrested over him." I perceived her to have a knife and wanting to kill me. So, naturally, I took off running, arms flailing in the air, screeching at the top of my lungs, "Help! Somebody just help me, please! I'm gonna die any minute." My friend had warrants at the time and did not chase after me, fearing that my screaming in an apartment complex in the early hours of the morning, mind you, would definitely bring police to this situation. I kept running and would collapse on the street or in the grass, and at one point on a bush, flashing to scenic trips in a completely different reality. I kept dying over and over in different, horrible ways. Running and stumbling alone, I realised I had a phone in my pocket. I couldn't remember my phone password, mind you, so I swiped to open the emergency call screen and dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? What's my emergency? I'm gonna die. Okay, what's going on? Oh, I don't know. Okay, why do you think you're dying? Well, I'm on drugs. I'm on drugs, and I've taken too much. Okay, what did you take? I don't know. Okay, can you tell me where you are? I don't know where I am. Okay, what do you see? There's a lot of cars. Are you in a parking lot? No, there's tall buildings all around me. Are you in an apartment complex? I look around in a state of panic and try to hang up the phone. It's locked up in emergency mode, so I cannot hang up. I get the "they know where I am" paranoid feeling start to arise. Look around and yell, "Oh shit!" I throw my phone as hard as I can on the concrete and watch it shatter. I ran away as fast as I could, yelling things like "fuck you!" I've no idea how long this ordeal lasted, since time had no meaning to me anymore. But soon enough, a police car pulled into the complex, and probably didn't have much trouble finding me, since I was yelling at the top of my lungs. I was ecstatic that a figure of authority had arrived, and ran out in the street waving my arms, yelling at the police car, I'm here, thank God you're finally here." The two officers stepped out of the car and asked what was going on, and I just made absolutely no sense, and was probably pretty obviously in a psychedelic trip if they knew how to recognise that. I was flashing in and out of this reality into those scenic trips again, many of which portrayed the officers as wanting to hurt me and or violate me, despite the fact that they actually did a pretty good job of not being threatening to me. In fact, I actually remember asking at one point, when I had no clue what was happening and no memory from anything before that moment, Am I being a threat to anyone here? Have I hurt anyone? Well, I'm so scared. I don't want to hurt anybody. He was saying things like, I don't know, bud, but help is coming, okay? I asked for today's date, and when he told me, I realised that no longer had any meaning to me other than knowing that it was a date. I asked him how old I was, and he told me, well, how am I supposed to know? You're the one asking me. Well, how old do I look to you? I don't know. Can I look in the side mirror on your car to see what I look like? Whoa. Please don't get close to my car. A lot of this nonsense went on, but eventually I would flash into another scenic trip with some perceived threat and just run away. I kept running from them and then giving myself back up to them, out of desperation for help. Eventually, an ambulance got there and a paramedic approached me. I leaned back and lunged my whole body into the hardest punch I could throw, right into the side of his head. He swung backwards and hit the side of the ambulance. I took off running as fast as I could, and one of the officers yelled, "Oh, hell no!" And this time, they all chased me. I pulled my shirt off and realised I was pissing myself, so I dropped my pants as well. I was then tackled on the street, butt naked. I fought back as hard as I could, but eventually I was knocked out. I never really fell asleep per se, but I lost speech and motor skills. I flew out of my body and into the worst hell I couldn't have imagined 30 seconds prior to being there. There was an incredible sense of loneliness and intense pain there. I was in a small dark area with a burning ball before me. I intuitively understood that the ball was the core of my being and was burning out. The goal in this place was to be able to die so I could stop suffering. But alas, in order to do so, I had to watch each piece of myself be torn away and float off into darkness. All of my memories, my desires, my goals. I watched it all be thrown away as the ball burned smaller and smaller until it finally burnt out for good. From there on, most of what I experienced was sensory overload that I just could not make sense of. All of my senses were taking in way too much data to form anything that I could put into text. I assigned myself a name to feel better about not knowing who I was, so I called myself Bob. Bob was a horrible, idiotic drug addict. I wasn't too far off from my real self in that guess, who didn't care enough to not push his own limits. I felt like a shell of a person that simply wanted drugs to feel whole. It was the most lonely feeling I have ever experienced. I didn't know what I looked like, but I had a picture of my parents in my head and thought about how disappointed they must be in Bob. I came to in the hospital the next morning and couldn't remember what had happened or how I'd gotten there. It took 3 months to remember. I quit all drugs for that 3 months and ended up taking a few hits off someone's joint at a concert one time. When I took my seat after the intermission was over, the memory all came flooding back to me, and I shook physically out of terror until I went to bed that very night. I've not been the same since I had that trip, and in a lot of ways it was for the better, but I have to live with that memory every day. There hasn't been an hour that goes by since that day that I'm not thinking about it, trying to process it and understand it. I developed HPPD and have had hallucinations persisting for just shy of a year now. Psychedelics are valuable tools when used properly. Just remember, it is possible to hurt yourself with a hammer. Reading this report was very, very surreal for me, because not only was the writing style so similar to my own, and the insights given by the author himself, Tommy, are so similar to my own. In fact, the last line of "but psychedelics are a valuable tool when used properly, just remember it's possible to hurt yourself with a hammer," that really struck a chord with me, because like I've said many times, psychedelics are a tool, and if you don't use tools properly with enough respect, skill, wisdom and background knowledge, like if I went and tried to chop a tree down with a chainsaw, I'm probably gonna do some damage to myself, someone's property, someone themselves, or just I'll mismanage it. And psychedelics are no different. The analogy stands true in that regard. If you mismanage something with as much power and as much force behind it, like psychedelics, you're gonna hurt yourself, and you could even hurt yourself permanently. Now, that struck a chord with me, but what really struck a chord with me was his experience of running around, pissing himself, flailing his arms around, having wacky, surreal conversations with police officers having to chase him down, to who really just doing the job, but because he's in such a altered state, the way he perceives the officers are like demons, literally demons running, chasing you, trying to do all sorts of ungodly, unimaginable, horrific stuff to you. And that's exactly how I perceived the police officers in my trip during my escapades on the Curry Mile in Manchester, where I ran around naked. People who have consumed a lot of my content are probably sick of me going on about this, but I always have to bear in mind that this might be the first video that people discover of mine. So in the description box, if you would like to hear more about my own experience, it's just called LSD Trip Report, Personal Story, Nothing to Hide. And if you don't fancy watching it, it's actually on Earwid on the LSD train wrecks and disasters section. It's actually one of the highest rated trip reports on there, which is pretty insane, under the username Cubbage. I wrote it many years ago. It took a while for them to actually accept the report. I imagine they get a lot, and they do really have a bar for quality, which is why I often do gravitate more towards Earwid trip reports, because they have a whole team who've been doing this for a long time, and I guess they have a certain procedure for analysing trip reports. And I like that they give notes here where, at the end of the day, the guy thought he took 1,200 micrograms. he might not have done, but he definitely had a high dose trip. The trip that happened for me when I ran around naked and had very similar experience to this guy, a lot less demonic and more confusing, but what I really related to was I had like it was positive, but also shocking in the same sense. This guy seemed to get a very nihilistic sort of dark perspective on death, where it was like literally just throwing yourself into a black void and forgetting everything, whereas mine was like unifying with all of reality and everything I've ever known. And there was this big white light that I chose to run into, but I didn't. I decided to stay alive. Thank God I did, because otherwise I wouldn't have made this video. But yeah, really interesting. If you never heard of that story of mine, please go and check it out and draw some parallels between this story I read here and my own, because this stuff can really happen to us when we misuse psychedelics, like I did, like this guy did. Taught me a very big lesson in life, and I'm very, very lucky to not have HPPD like this person has. Although what I do have is my relationship with cannabis is just completely different, and every single time I make the silly decision to have a bit of a joint, all the memories, all the negative memories of all my negative psychedelic trips all come flooding back to me. Akin to what many would call online an acid flashback. Yeah, not saying acid flashbacks are like a real thing, but if you're gonna relate it to anything that people refer to online, that's what it feels like. It feels like it brings it all back up to the surface, and thus I cannot smoke the Mary Jane or enjoy it anymore. Anyway guys, hope you got something out of this report, and I hope you enjoyed this commentary. Good afternoon, good evening, and good night. I'll see you on the other side, guys.